The reason why I'm so delighted to be here is because I have seen your background and what a joy it is to be in this wonderful outbreak. Politicians are easily flattered. We are very vain. I'm no exception. Something that was brought home to me forcibly after the last election, which I announced that I'd lost at 1 o'clock in the morning, only to win gloriously at 3:30. Having lost, I said, Jim Lockerty said to me, "Why do you think you've lost this election, Bob?" And I said, "It's entirely due to the Prime Minister." When we won, he said, "I suppose you now want to give the credit to the Prime Minister," and I said, "Certainly not." But we are vain. Shortly after that victory, I was in a taxi going to Heathrow. I was going to Paris for the weekend in order to look after the interests of my constituents. One of them anyway. And as we were driving down the motorway, I could see the taxi driver was looking at me from time to time in his mirror. And as we got close to the Heathrow turnoff, he opened the sleeve and he said to me, he said, "All right, Gov," he said, "give us a clue." And I said, "Well, I'm a politician. I'm a backbencher, but I'm quite often on the television and the radio talking about a number of things in politics, civil liberties, war, terrorism, that kind of thing. And I write for newspapers and I scribble the odd book. I expect that's it." And he said, "Yeah, Gov," he said, "which terminal are we?" Total problem, wrestling with vanity. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. I shall tell Matthew when I see him that I've got quite close to his number. That will upset him. But and we talk endlessly, of course, about how we are going to increase interest in politics, how we are going to increase the vote. Matthew was actually down in my constituency. He was following the last election when I had an interesting altercation with one of my constituents. It was later reported by Simon Hoggett. It was also there in the Guardian. We had problems with immigration, of course, being in Kent, and it was one of the really big worries. And we had altercations on the streets, and finally ended up with me with one of my constituents after a heated discussion. I said, "Listen, my friend," I said, "the one difference between you and I is this: you are a racist and I am not. Now, under no circumstances are you to vote for me." And he said, "I'll vote for who I like." And I said, "No, no, you can vote for who you like, except for me." And he said, "I bloody well will vote for you." So there you are. That's how to get the vote out. It's not entirely irrelevant to what I want to say this evening, and what I hope that we will be able to discuss later. And it's political dissidence. Does it exist? Should it exist in a pluralistic democracy which has so many other outlets for political activity? Is there such a thing as a subspecies of politician who is a natural political dissident, or are all politicians, as my constituents frequently tell me, all the same? It's going to be, you're not surprised to know that my answer to all of those questions is going to be yes, and I very much hope that you're going to disagree with me in some way or another. Is there a separate genus, a separate subspecies of politician who is dissident rather than otherwise? Well, I'd like to throw this idea out to you. People go into politics for two motivations, for two reasons, I would suggest. One, perhaps the overwhelming majority, is in order to achieve power. The other is in order to control. The two can be mixed. They are mixed in some politicians. They were undoubtedly mixed in Churchill. They were undoubtedly mixed in Charles Fox. But they are rare beasts in a political jungle. I have never made any secret of the fact that I went into politics insofar as I hope to do anything in order to control power, which is very lucky because I'm very unlikely ever to achieve it. But it's worth thinking. Yeah, I want to immediately distinguish dissidence from opposition. Opposition is simply a state of affairs in politics and in Parliament. Dissidence, it seems to me, is something different. Dissidence is the concept of political activity which is motivated by the creative conscience rather than dictated by party political or personal political advantage. In other words, it is a starting point. And also, I would like to distinguish this from revolution. I think this is important in democratic politics. Dissidence, of course, exists in a revolutionary world, and perhaps when we have a discussion, we can talk about revolution. But it occurred to me when I wrote these words that, of course, the great double acts of revolutionary history are almost the perfect example of what I have just said. I'm going to get in touch, I'm going to get in trouble with Catherine Brown for saying this, but I mean, the first one that I thought of immediately was Lenin and Trotsky. Lenin knew more about power than probably than any politician of his century. He achieved it, he used it ruthlessly, he used it as ruthlessly as the Tsars that he had dispersed. Trotsky disliked power, hated it, regarded it as being an affront to the purity of the proletariat. Now that interesting argument in political history was of course put to bed in a thoroughly Russian way by an ice pick being driven straight through Trotsky's very substantial brain. But nonetheless, it seemed to me that it underscores this idea that there are two types of politician, Castro and Guevara, another classic example. Castro knew everything about power. He wanted power, he desired power more than anything else, as a result of which he has spent the last half a century in power, much of it filled with his interminable and completely speeches. But Guevara, of course, disliked it, hated it, couldn't live with it, disliked the concept of power, believed in the control of power, and as a result his own particular ice pick was to be riddled with bullets in the jungles of Latin America. You could argue the same for de Valera and Collins, and Shakespeare, of course, had his own go at this, realizing that precisely this dichotomy existed in Parliament. The lean and hungry Cassius was hungry for one thing, which was, of course, power. The noble, naive, and incredibly annoyingly gullible Brutus committed his own act of fastidious murder in order to control it. And as a result, not so much later, according to Shakespeare, at least fell on his sword in Philippi. So, I mean, one can see that dissidence, certainly revolutionary dissidence, is quite a dangerous game. It's not as dangerous in democratic politics, I'm delighted to say, but the next thing that one has to ask is it necessary? Is there a legitimate role in democratic politics for dissidents? Are dissidents the essence of democracy? Or are they, as they are so often categorized, we are so often categorized as bloody-minded, self-serving, self-publicizing rabble, or as John Major more elegantly described his own European dissidents as bastards? Does dissidence and its handmaiden disobedience breathe life into the democratic process, or does it threaten the essential orderly discipline of party politics?